everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Brad Gotto. I'm your host, and I'm here with Carly Carlson, my co-host. Carly, how are you?
I'm doing well. We're here in the office and there's a lot of snow outside. So that alone is good news today.
I actually was going to reach out to you this morning and see if you're actually even going to make it in, because a lot of people are staying home.
My husband actually offered to drive me in today because he was a little worried that I'll be trying to make it on the roads. You know, Oregonians trying to drive in Minnesota weather, it's pretty rough.
That's fair.
Transplant.
That's fair. I actually drive an all-wheel drive truck, and I took my wife's SUV because it has snow tires on it. Do you have snow tires on your vehicles?
I don't. Noah has snow tires on his truck. My van does not, which I think is why he was extra worried about me today. He even still, once I got here, said like, okay, well, if you need a ride home, I'll come to the office and pick you up and get you home. So
you have a ride.
Yes.
I will tell you, if you go to snow tires, you will never go back. So that's what we're going to do the whole podcast episode today is snow tires, and why everybody that lives in Minnesota should have snow tires. They're expensive, but they're worth every penny.
And you leave them on year round?
No, you can't. No,
how oblivious
they're only okay.
Okay.
Yeah, nobody cares. All right. That being said, Carly, we're not here on this podcast by ourselves. We actually have a guest with us today. These are one of my favorite episodes, is when we get to have somebody that's smarter than us come in and educate our listeners. Today we have Heather Schreiber with us on the podcast. Heather, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
I'm very engaged with the snow tire conversation, being in Georgia where we never get snow, but I am engaged. I really want
You do sometimes in Georgia get snow and the whole world shuts down.
It's like Armageddon. Yes, yeah. We get a flake and the whole city shuts down. So it does. I have to admit. So please send some of that snow here, because I get really excited when we get it, because it rarely happens. Rarely happens.
I think by the time the bus showed up for my boys this morning, there was probably 5 or 6 inches on the ground, and we weren't even late. Like they didn't blink. Like, we're going to school. It was windy. The snow's blowing across the road. Nobody cares.
No one cares. Well, they would care here, let me tell you.
Well, Heather, thanks again for joining us on the podcast today. Heather is joining us. Our episode today is all about Social Security. Now, if you're nearing or in retirement, even if you're not, even if you're my age and you're 42 years old, like, you should care about this, because all of us have a Social Security benefit or are working towards having a Social Security benefit. And actually, before we started recording, Heather, I think you made a comment that like 90% of people end up using or dealing with Social Security in their lifetime. So we're hitting the masses here. But when it comes to Social Security, I'm promising all of the listeners, it's more confusing than you think that it is. And so the best thing we could possibly do for you is just bring you an expert that deals with this all day, every day. And that's what Heather is. Heather's been in the financial services industry for over 30 years. She has a specialty in kind of working with not only financial advisors, but on the tax side as well, and kind of has an advanced planning. It's not a degree by, when you're talking about like a 4-year education, but Heather, I would say you have a PhD in Social Security and helping people with that. So I appreciate you giving us some time today to share some of that with our listeners.
I always say I have a PhD degree in being nerdy, and I embrace it fully. I am a bookworm, and I fully embrace it. So I'm
That's
fine
awesome.
with it, but I am so glad to be here with both of you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us. And Heather, you're coming to us from Georgia, so you're not dealing with the same snow as we referenced earlier. I also found out prior to the show that you're a person of 2s, 2 boys, 2 girls, 2 dogs, and 2 cats, and 2 husbands.
Well, that's a whole nother thing. No.
I'm kidding. One husband.
For that to the internet webs, I have one amazing husband.
Yeah.
But like I said in the prior conversation, he sometimes thinks that my split personalities count as 2 wives, because it depends on what time of day it is that he might get the second personality. After about 8 o'clock, it's all bets are off. I'm exhausted, and the other personality comes out. No one talks to me after that. They all know.
That's fair.
So that's fair.
I wouldn't say the clock. I probably have 2 of them as well. My wife would probably agree with that. Mine is probably more dictated by caffeine or no caffeine.
No, yeah, mine's like after about 8 o'clock, I'm like, don't speak to me. My brain shuts off. And so like Cruella comes out. So
I have a friend who calls it sundowners. Down and
yeah.
That's really bad for her husband in the winter, because that's like the whole day.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, imagine living in Alaska or Iceland.
Yeah, you guys
right?
Don't have quite the bad, or you probably have more sun than we do, like time-wise, right? The sun doesn't go down as early for you guys.
I don't know. It gets pretty dark here these days. It gets dark around 6 o'clock.
Yeah, we're still earlier than you.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
Unfortunately.
Well, then I'm grateful.
Let's get to the meat and potatoes. Heather, my hope is to have you back multiple times this year, because this is this is an elephant of a conversation. Of
Yeah.
course, we can't eat the whole elephant in one bite or in one podcast episode. But for today's purposes, what I would love to do is just kind of pick out some of the, because you deal with this all day, every day. And so kind of the three biggest things that you currently are dealing with that seem to come up the most, the biggest problems. We talked about this a little bit offline, but people sometimes just don't know what they don't know. They don't know what questions to even ask or even to think about. And Social Security is such an important part of people's retirement that getting it right is really, really important. And so what I'd like to focus on today is just kind of the three biggest issues or tripwires that you see that you're dealing with like in real time in your life. And so let's just kick it off that way with kind of the first issue here. Carly, do you want to lead us in here?
Yeah. So what we were kind of talking about and thinking about is Social Security can seem sometimes like a black box, like you've been paying in your whole life, or maybe your spouse been paying in as their whole working career. But then at some point when you go to claim, like how do individuals determine what benefit they're eligible for and calculate that benefit?
Yeah. I mean, so that's the crux of it, right? And surveys show, in fact, a recent AARP survey, surveyed, many people and kind of about their basic Social Security knowledge. And you would be surprised that the majority fail. They really didn't understand. They know they pay in, they know that payroll tax that comes out of their paycheck, but they didn't really understand how many years of earnings go into that calculation. Most people know that the earliest you can take a benefit is 62 for retirement, but they didn't know much beyond that. And so that's really critically important, is sort of understanding how do you become eligible for it? And more importantly, how do you get the most out of the benefit? How do you increase your benefit? And so that's one of the things that I think is critically important, is understanding not only how you become eligible, which is fairly straightforward. You pay FICA taxes or Social Security taxes on your earnings, and you have to earn what's called 40 credits or quarters of coverage. Now, every year that quarter is worth a certain amount. I think in 2025, I'm going to go forward. 2025, that quarter of coverage is $1,810. So if you earn enough in Social Security covered earnings to have $1,810, you've earned one quarter of coverage. That times 4 in a year, you've earned 4 quarters. You can only earn 4 quarters in a year. Now, if you've done that for 10 years, you've essentially earned your 40 credits, right? You have forever more become eligible or entitled at some point in the future at 62 or beyond to a retirement benefit. Okay. So when you hear, I have to work 10 years to become eligible at some point in the future for a Social Security benefit, that's where that comes from. Okay. You've earned your 40 credits. Now, once you've earned them, you won't see them on your statement anymore. Before you've earned them all, you'll see you have earned 25 credits. Well, once you've earned them, that goes away. You now have earned a benefit at some point in the future. What people though then think is, well, now I've earned it, I can stop. It doesn't stop there though. You want to maximize your benefit, and your future benefit, or what's called your primary insurance amount. I won't get too technical, but it's based on your highest 35 years of earnings, Social Security taxable earnings over the course of your earnings career, right? So it's based upon that. Now it's indexed. So it's indexed in the year that you turn 60. Why do they index it? Well, they bring those years, your earlier years, like mine were in the late 80s. I started to work out of high school and college. They bring those into current, the prices of today. So they take all of those earnings, they index them, and then they pick the highest 35 years. Okay, that's what you want to get to. Now, the big point that I wanted to stress is that if you lack 35 years, then Social Security isn't going to just say, well, you only have 20, we'll use 20 to calculate. They actually substitute zeros for the missing years. So that's important, because when they calculate, they take your missing years and they figure out what your average earnings are over the course of your career, and they're substituting zeros. What does that do? Well, when they're calculating your average monthly earnings or average indexed monthly earnings, what does a bunch of zeros do? Well, it draws your benefit amount down, because when they calculate that earnings and they apply it to this formula, then you're going to have a much lower benefit than if you could replace those zero earnings with even part-time earnings. So I always say, I always talk about boosting your benefit, even if it's with part-time earnings to replace zeros, is always going to do you well. People say, should I continue to work? Yes, especially if you have taken breaks in work history. There was a time earlier on, I've always done retirement income planning, but there was a time when I kind of took some time off to raise these little nuggets that I have that are now all grown up. My last one's graduating high school in May. So I took some time off, sort of. I consulted from home. I did take a few years where I didn't work at all. So I do have some zeros in there. And so I'm working to replace all of those zeros so that I can maximize my benefit. So I think really understanding that's critical. Okay, my benefit is based on 35 years of earnings. If I have zeros in there, can I increase it? Yes. Replace those zeros with earnings years. So that's a critical takeaway that most people don't understand. So that's
I think it's a really good point. And I just want to interject, because when you think about those later years in life, or Heather, like in your situation, trying to replace a couple of zeros, further into your career when you've got adult children, a lot of people make decisions based on, okay, this is what I earn per hour, or this is my salary. And then they do look at like their retirement benefits at that employer. If they have a 401k or a 403b or something like that, and the match that they earn, and they're like, well, I want to make sure that I earn that match. And in this case, and this is the extreme example, if you have a zero in there, but it could even be that of those 35 years, there's a couple of years that are just really low. And in reality, it's not just what you're earning and the 401k match. That job that you have in that moment is also kind of double dipping and creating more of a Social Security benefit for you all at the same time. And just something people need to consider when they're making those choices later in life.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of situations, usually it tends to be women where we take career breaks, right? We're the ones that generally obviously we have the children, and then we might be the ones that take the career breaks like I did. Okay, I'm gonna stay home for a while, raise them, and then what happens later? I'm experiencing this now where I have an aging parent who is in the early stages of dementia. And so we tend to be the ones that are caregivers. And so I see a lot of that in my practice where I'm looking at Social Security earnings statements where I see, earnings early on and then some zeros. And then I see earnings going back and then some zeros. So there's always opportunities to go back, even if it's part-time, work. Hey, we become empty nesters. And then we're like, okay, what do I do now? Right. So anytime you can replace earnings with zeros, very good opportunity to, continue to work, boost retirement savings, and boost your Social Security benefit.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier that I want to get to as well, which is what you call Social Security autonomy. But before we get there, let me just kind of tie a bow on what we just talked about. And that is, simply put, before you file, one of the things you should do is look into your earnings history, right? One, make sure you have your 40 credits. And if you do, then look at this 35-year look back, and figure out if there is something you could or should be doing to maximize your benefit before you just, flip the switch and file. And so for all the listeners out there, if you're not doing that, and you're not looking at your statement or going out to ssa.gov and looking at that data, it's all out there. They have listed out for you year after year what they have on record for your earnings and the years where you might have a zero, things like that. It's all there for you to look at. The other thing, Heather, I want to ask you about before we go to the autonomy thing is, I've heard from people multiple times. I'm curious if this is true or not, or if you have an opinion on it. A lot of people's earnings, I've been told a lot of people's earnings histories are wrong. Like that you should just double check and make sure that the data they've got recorded is correct.
Yeah.
People are missing earnings history, things like that.
It happens, right? And so I view my Social Security statement like my credit report. I am like crazy about my credit score and credit report. So I look at my credit report. I mean, I pull it once annually because you can do that for free. But I look at my Social Security statement as the same way. I'm like, my benefit, by golly, I paid into this, and I want to make sure that my earnings are reported correctly. So you want to get in the habit of going and, first of all, everyone should have an online Social Security account. So if you're listening to this and you don't, please go sign up for one, because there's a lot of information there. And most definitely, you do want to look at your earnings history to make sure it's accurate. Because if you're not doing it once every 5 years and you find out that 5 years ago your earnings were inaccurate, it's a lot harder to reconcile that with Social Security 5 years ago than it is if it was just last year or a year or 2 years ago. You're more likely to have those records. It's a lot easier to correct it. So yes, I've seen it happen. where it just doesn't show up correctly. So you do want to correct that. There are, you can go into Social Security's website and just write, in the search engine, how to correct earnings record. And that there's a one-page instructional on how to do that. So always go in and check your earnings. The other thing is the Social Security statement, the new 2-page version of it truncates earlier earnings into bands of years. So you can't look at all of your earnings if you're just looking at your 2-page statement. But if you go into your online account, it will say review earnings history. That's a separate, you just click on it. You can look at your year over year earnings for every single year, print that bad boy and just eyeball it to make sure it looks accurate to you.
Yeah.
And that's also where you go to find out, what your benefit estimates are going to be. What would happen if you were disabled today? What would happen if you passed away? What will your family receive? There's so much information within that portal that you can do. The other thing that's a beautiful thing is you say, well, how much exactly? Heather says that I could increase my benefit if I went back to work. How much exactly would that make an effect on my current projected benefits? I'll tell you how. If you go in there, there is a retirement calculator right on the homepage when you log in, and it has it's called retirement calculator. It's a very snazzy title. But if you go into that, it populates with your most recent year of earnings. So say last year you made 50,000. It's going to show 50,000. You can change that. Say it was 0 because you haven't been working. But you say, well, what if I go and just get a part-time job making 20,000 a year, and then I retire at 67 or whatever the case may be? You can do that, and it will automatically take your historic earnings, assume that you're going to earn 20,000, and recompute your benefit based upon that new assumption. It's beautiful. Because what your current projections are doing is assuming that you're going to work at the same level that your most recent year of earnings shows you is working. So that's a way of sort of playing around with the effect of what different levels of earnings will do to your eventual benefit. So go in there and use it, because it's a very powerful tool to be able to sort of make sure everything looks right and to sort of play around with what could be if you changed your earning scenarios.
I love that. I love empowering people to have information and to have autonomy, like you said.
And what remind me and the listeners that when you're working, what portion of the FICA, like what's the percentage that's pulled for Social Security? Your percent, assuming you have a W-2 job.
Yeah. So the portion, if you're a W-2 employee, it's 6.2% of your paycheck that goes towards Social Security. Now, the 1.45% is the portion that goes toward the Medicare side, the Medicare taxes. That goes all the way up, all of your W-2 compensation, the Medicare portion.
Yeah.
Social Security has a taxable maximum. So this year it's 164, I should know, 168 something. What is it? Hold on. 168.6. So if you earn more than 168,600 this year, that 6.2 would max out at only 168,600. That's going to be the amount, the maximum compensation that is also used to calculate your benefit. Now, for Medicare purposes, if you made more than that, it would include 1.45% for all of it. If you're self-employed, then you'll pay both sides of that tax. So there is a maximum. The other thing that I often get while we're on this, the point of earnings and your benefits, some people say there's no point of me if I'm collecting benefits. There's no point of me continuing to work. It's not going to positively impact my benefit. It can. So if you're collecting your benefit and you still continue to work, Social Security will recalculate your what's called your primary insurance amount, your benefit, to determine if that most recent year of recorded earnings that they just communicated with the IRS with, if that will bump out one of the highest 35 years. If it does, Social Security will send you a letter and say, you're entitled to a higher monthly income benefit, and they will pay you that new benefit plus a retroactive, lump sum of the difference between the two. So don't discount the idea that continuing to work in retirement, phased retirement or working part-time just to have some extra spending money, it can have positive effects in a lot of different ways, boosting retirement, matching, like we're talking, all kinds of different ways it can really be a positive thing.
It's not even why I asked the question, but that's a really, really good point. But going back to the original question, like the beginning of it, of the 6.2%, the reason I bring it up is because if you think, the thing that blows my mind is you're talking about logging into SSA, what you can do, tracking it, paying attention to it, trying to maximize it. These are all things the average person does with things like their 401k.
Yeah.
Right? They watch it, they track it, they understand like how the money is growing, and maybe not every detail or why they're allocated the way that they are. Maybe they just picked a target date fund, but that's not my point is they know how much money's going into it. They know what their match is, things like this. 6.2% of your income is going into a future retirement benefit
Right.
for you. We should be paying just as much attention to that, monitoring that, to your point, year over year, making sure that it's recording correctly so that 6.2% that I put in of whatever my income is, that my income's recorded correctly so that I get credit for that on the benefit on the back end. It blows my mind that it just seems like such a, behind the scenes, back burner type issue for people when in reality, the average worker puts a ton of money into Social Security over their lifetime.
When you think about it, I mean, the defined benefit plan, the pension of the old days has now been replaced by the 401k or the defined contribution. So now the responsibility is more on the worker to save for their retirement, and defined benefit pension plans are really where we see those is for, mostly government workers. And so, a recent survey or recent statistics that I saw from the Bureau of Labor Statistics says about less than 15% of non-government workers have access to a pension. Well, hello, Social Security is your pension. Yeah. So you should be treating it as such. I mean, when you are, in the old days, or those that do have pensions, they don't just kind of look at and do this and pick their choice, right? They really think about what choice should I take? Should I take the single life? Should I take the qualifying joint survivor 50? It's kind of the same thing. It is the same thing. Social Security, you put a lot of money into that. So you better really choose wisely on your claiming decision. And if you're married, it becomes, doubly important in a way because you're trying to make this source of income, this pension-like source of income last for not one life, but for two. So it's incredibly important. Hence the reason I get so excited about it. My family gets so tired of listening to me talk about how excited I get about Social Security.
I mean, you said it yourself, so I'm not putting words in your mouth. Like, it is a nerdy thing to get excited about Social Security.
I own it. But, because
somebody has to.
I mean, somebody has to. And the reality is, if you call Social Security, and there are some fine individuals that work there, but they're not there to give advice. They can answer yes or no questions. They can help you file a claim. They are not there to sit and have conversations like you and I are having right now. They're not. In fact, they're prohibited from doing that. And they've had a lot of turnover since COVID. A lot of their longtime employees have left. So now we have new people coming into the building that don't know all the rules from 30 years ago. And so it's become more difficult. So you really need to advocate for yourself. And yes, Carly, I use the word a lot, empower yourself. I'm a big advocate for empowering yourself with the knowledge to know, what do I have to really consider here? That's why I believe strongly that people that do work with financial advisors that know this stuff, that's the partnership, because it really isn't. Social Security, that decision can't be done in a bubble. It has to be done as part of a larger plan. It's the foundation, but you have to look at everything else. And so that's why I'm so passionate about building it as the foundation, but in conjunction with all of the other things that are going on to build a sustainable, hopefully tax efficient retirement income plan.
Yeah, you mentioned, so let's circle back to point number 2 here is going to be this working while you're claiming, because you kind of brought it up already a little bit in this idea that if, you've reached full retirement age and you're still working, it's possible that they could actually recalc your benefit. Yeah. But what about just backing up all the way to the beginning? Because you could file as early as age 62 and there's an impact, at different types of impact at different years, depending on when you file and what type of work and that kind of stuff. And so let's just talk a little bit about that, because I feel like that's another, big misunderstanding for most people.
It is. So we talked about the positive sides of continuing to work and how it could potentially increase your benefit. Now, the roadblock or the minefield that you need to avoid is if you're considering filing for benefits to supplement your earnings and you're under full retirement age. There's where you have to tread lightly, because Social Security says, hey, if you continue to work, and incidentally, they used to have this rule go all the way up to 70. They changed it to where it stops at full retirement age. But if you want to continue to work and you're under full retirement age when you claim, that Social Security has something called an earnings test or an annual earnings test. And basically they say you can file for a benefit. However, if you exceed a certain threshold of earned income, we're not talking about pension income, IRA distributions, dividends, capital gains. We're not talking any of those things. True earned income. If you exceed a certain threshold of income, then we're going to start withholding your benefits by a certain percentage of the amount over that threshold. So for example, I'm going to just talk about 2025. That number, if you're going to be under full retirement age the whole year, say you're 62 and you want to file, but you're going to continue to work, that earnings threshold is 23,400. If you're under it, you have no problems. You can file. You'll, of course, get a reduced benefit by as much as 30% if it's a retirement benefit because you're filing 5 years early if your full retirement age is 70. But you're going to be fine. You can still work because you're under the limit. But if you exceed 23,400 in earned income, Social Security says, okay, we're going to withhold or reduce your benefit by half of whatever the amount is over that exemption amount. So because I am not great with math on my feet, let's use whole numbers. If I'm 10,000 over that 23,400, then Social Security says, I'm going to withhold $5,000 of your benefits before I pay you a dime. So if I have a $2,000 monthly benefit, 2,000 divided or 5,000 divided by 2,000 is 2.5, right? They're going to say, well, we're not going to pay you for the first 3 months. They round 2.5 to 3 months, and then we'll pay you in month 4. That doesn't work well if what you're trying to do is supplement earnings with this source of income that you're going to rely on if you're not going to get the first 3 months of benefit. So it doesn't work well. Now that's if you tell Social Security up front. And when you go and file, and most people are filing online, that's the easiest way to do it. You should be telling Social Security. They'll ask, are you working? How much are you earning? Some people don't do that, or they intend to retire and then their spouse says, well, you're kind of getting on my nerves, go back and get a job. And I see that happen all the time. And then they go back to work. They don't tell Social Security. Maybe they don't even know about this earnings test. And then they get the letter in the mail that says, dear John, I went back to work because I was getting on my wife's nerves. We've discovered that you earned too much money and we've now paid you $5,000 extra in benefits that we shouldn't have. Please send us a check in lump sum. We'll be waiting for you. Or your deposit. And usually it's a lot more than 5,000 by the time it's caught, they're caught, right? And so then people are like, these eyes, like what? And so you don't want that to happen. Now, Social Security has recently changed their overpayment recovery process. They used to just say, okay, if we don't hear from you in 60 days, we're going to cut off your benefits immediately. They've changed that. The point is, my rule of thumb is usually, if you're going to continue to work, I personally would prefer you not file for Social Security benefits.
Yeah.
Even if it's under, I mean, if you have to. Now, necessity is one thing, okay? But if there are options to be made, I'd say, is there another way we could bridge that income you're trying to achieve with something else? Because if you're going to be over the limit, it becomes a nightmare. It becomes sort of a headache because they're going to withhold some of your benefits, or God forbid you get the overpayments letter. But it becomes sort of a nightmare if you're trying to make bridge income and they're withholding benefits. But the good news is, if that does happen, if they, in my first example, where they withheld 3 months of benefits, and let's say that goes on for a couple of years, they're withholding, say, over the course of time, they withhold 10 months of benefits from this person. They finally hit full retirement age, which the earnings limit, that goes away. Once you hit full retirement age, you can earn $1 million, and Social Security says you're fine. You've met full retirement age. We no longer care. Social Security does reinstate or pay back those withheld months of benefits, but they do it by recalculating the benefit. They don't give it to them in lump sum. They basically recalculate those 10 months into the new monthly income benefit. So they'd say, okay, well, you filed at 62 initially. We're going to recalculate your benefit as if you had filed at 62 and 10 months. So they get it sort of over time in the form of a higher monthly benefit.
So if you owe them money, you have to pay back in a lump sum. But when they owe you money,
they pay it right. But if you don't pay it in a lump sum, if you do, so if you get the, dear John, you went back to work and didn't tell us, they'll say, we would like the money back in cash, check, charge, credit card, give us your Amex, whatever they say. Not really, but something like that. And then people call me and they're like, what do I do? So the way they've changed it is they, like I said, they used to say, if we don't hear from you, we're going to start withholding your benefits on X date until we recover the overpayment. Now what they've done back in March of last year, they changed that because there was an expose by 60 Minutes the year before that basically made Social Security look like bad people, because a lot of these disabled people were getting these overpayments notices, and their benefits were being taken away. And so they changed the rule now to where if you don't pay it back in lump sum, you don't make a repayment plan with them, they will, if they don't hear from you, they'll start the overpayment recovery at 10% of your monthly income benefit. So it's not nearly as egregious as 100 anymore. Nevertheless, don't get yourself in that situation. I always say, if you're under full retirement age and you're going to continue to work, unless you're well under the limit, it's really not fun to go through that process in general, is what I would say.
Yeah. So to wrap that up, because we got one more kind of point I want to make before we end this podcast. And Carly, before I let you ask that question, a couple things, just summarize, because work affects your retirement benefit, whether you file early or you filed late and you're still working. It could be negative and it could be positive.
Right.
So just understand that if you're going to work and be on Social Security at the same time, there is an effect to that, and it can be positive and negative. So just make sure you understand those things. That's what working with somebody that knows what they're doing, an advisor, otherwise can be super helpful. Having somebody like Heather in your corner, something that we obviously pay attention to here at Fiat. In fact, I did it with my mom. My mom was somebody that needed to file early for cash flow purposes, but had part-time income. And so we had to go through I went through the whole process with her online. I knew exactly how much she made. And she was one of those people that was close, right? Where as a single person, like how much income she could earn prior to her benefit being clawed back, to the point where we had to kind of have the conversation of how many hours she was going to work. It was an hourly job, how many hours per week, kind of doing the math and reverse engineering and trying to teach her, like, look, mom, if you work more than this, it's actually a negative thing to you, not a positive. Like the $15 an hour they're paying you isn't going to net you anything after they start to claw back your Social Security. Right. So it is super important. But I also have to tell a really funny story. So, because you made the comment of like retiring and going back to work and all that kind of stuff. And this happens more than you would think. I was actually really early in my career, and so I didn't understand that. And I had this couple that I'd worked with for like 2 years, and we worked really hard to get them to retirement. They had some complexities and some things just going on, some family dynamics that were really, really, really tough. And so we worked super hard for a couple of years to get the husband to retirement. The wife had retired. And he was at 70 years old, still slugging bags at TSA. And so, back pain, all the things, like trying to get him to retirement. So finally get it done. Super excited. It wasn't 2 months later. The receptionist at my office rings me back in my office, and she's like, hey, so-and-so is here to see you. And I'm like, what? I'm freaking out. I'm like looking at my calendar. This is back in the day, paper calendars. And I'm like flipping through my paper calendar, and I'm like, I don't have him on my calendar. Like, did I mess something up? Like, gosh, I don't have anything prepared. I don't know what he's here for. So I was like, can you just, put him in the conference room? I'll be up in a second. And so I get up there and I was like, I'm so sorry. I don't have you in my, and she's like, no, we don't have an appointment. I just need to talk to you. And I was like, okay. And he goes, you need to tell my wife that I have to go back to work. And I was like, what? I was like, no. We worked super hard to get you to retire. He's like, no. You don't understand. I need you to tell, I know I don't have to, but I need you to tell her that I have to financially. I'm like, I don't understand. Like, what do you, he goes, I can't take her. I can't take 40 more hours. I got to go back to work, but I can't tell her that. So you need to tell her that financially we can't afford for me to stay retired. And he was dead serious. What's that?
Did you comply?
I did not. Because that's a lie.
Right.
And so I told him, I was like, look, I'm sorry, as a fiduciary, I can't do that for you. You're going to have to find a different, more creative way to convince your wife that you have to go back to work.
So funny. That is so funny. Yeah, I hear it a lot too. Like, oh, this is just, no, I got to go back. So
going to be really obnoxious.
Yeah. I think his exact words were 40 more hours a week with this woman I cannot take, or something. It was aggressive. Oh man. Anyway, let's one more final point here. Carly, take us home.
Yeah. Heather, in this Social Security space, we talk about break even. Can you just share for our listeners, like, what does that mean? What's that analysis look like? What should people be considering when we're talking about break even and, as a function of filing for benefits?
Yeah, I think that that could be we could do a whole session on break even. But of course, it's sort of like that question. It is a natural place for people to start, because the question is, how long do I have to live to make it worth waiting, right? We've paid into this. And so we're like, or what if I don't live long enough, right? I've
Yeah.
waited, but what if I die tomorrow? And so it's a natural place to start. What is the break even that it makes sense? If I think we don't have a crystal ball, we all don't know how long we're going to live. And so, mathematically we could talk about, well, if we're talking with zero cost of living adjustments, if I were to talk about strictly in math numbers, the break even between filing at 62 versus waiting until 66, 67 range is about 78 years old. What does that mean? Well, if I lived to 78 or longer, it would have been better for me to forego benefits at a reduced rate for those 5 years.
Yep.
And wait for the higher benefit. Right. And if the break even for waiting even to age 70, so waiting that an additional for 8 years is going to be if I live to be longer than 82. Well, if you think about that, the average life expectancy for a healthy 65-year-old male is 84. And for a female that age, it's 87. So we're already even below average life expectancy. And so by that statistic, everyone should wait till 70. Not practical. And certainly there's an emotional component to Social Security. Who's going to tell everybody, yeah, you got to wait? So that's not practical. So I think
to be clear too, because I think people misunderstand life expectancy. Life expectancy by definition is the coin flip, heads or tails, 50-50.
Right.
50% die beyond that date,
right.
50% before that date. So if you plan just to life expectancy, you're literally planning a coin flip.
That's right. That's right. And again, going back to what we already talked about, which is for a lot of people, this is their pension. It is one of the only sources of income that they will have for the rest of their life that does have an inflationary hedge. So I would treat it like that. So where it gets more complex, and again, Brad, I hope we do this again because we could talk about this subject alone. Where it gets a little bit more complex, if you're single and you're only worrying about your own lifetime, it's one thing. When you're talking to a couple who is relying on this and you're thinking of yourself and you're thinking, well, I have some health issues. I don't think I'm going to live that long. And you're married to someone, then it becomes more complex because going back to these survey results, like the most recent AARP ones, people don't understand how interrelated the claiming decision of the higher wage earner is to their spouse. How survivor benefits work, how spousal benefits work. They don't understand that. And so when you look at the longevity of just one person when you're dealing with a couple, that can be a grave mistake because if the higher wage earner decides that, hey, nobody in my family lived past 75, so for me, it makes sense to file at 62, but they have a spouse who's primarily a caregiver, that is going to be a problem because even if that fruition comes true and they only live to 75, they've left a surviving spouse, a dependent surviving spouse with a much smaller income as the survivor because that dependent spouse is going to step into the shoes of that decision of the higher wage earner to file at 62, take that reduced benefit for the rest of their lives. And that could be a very long time as a single person if they're widowed when their spouse is 75. Right.
Yeah.
So it's complex. The other thing is statistics, longevity studies show that couples together live longer than single people.
Yeah.
They're happy, maybe because they go back to work when they think they should stay home after retirement. No, but the point is they live longer. So do you want to coin flip and be wrong? You have to just be mindful and practical with how you sort of balance the equation of, well, what if I don't live long enough? And I've foregone these benefits but what if I do? And what if I live longer? So it's really this balance of taking that, looking at benefit amounts between couples, and really just balancing it and then weaving in the other sources of income we have to supplement all of this. It's really a puzzle of putting it together in the most tax efficient way. It's why I get so excited about it because it is not just, it is a puzzle. And
I think that's, and I'm going to end there because it's a great tease because we will have you back and we could do a whole episode literally just on this because outside of just the math where you're trying to guess your own longevity and figuring out total summation of benefits, right? Like where do I get the most total money, the biggest pile of money out of the system? And that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? Whether you're, single male, single female, or you're a married couple in these ages of, we'll just say late 70s into your early 80s. there's a lot of other things to keep in mind around break even. It could be the taxation of Social Security from a filing perspective, like other things you should keep in mind of when to file. It could be your taxes. It could be other earned income that you've got coming in the door, which we alluded to a little bit earlier. Are you still working part-time job, that kind of stuff? It could be other sources of income, like what other types of monies have I saved? And are those monies sitting in pre-tax accounts, post-tax accounts, tax-free accounts? And how can I use those monies in conjunction or prior to filing? It could be health-related issues. It could be a lot of different things and factors that go into this decision of when to file. And so I think we could do a whole episode just on that. And so I think that's a great tease for when you come back, Heather, is we'll just kind of unpack that in its own episode. I think we could do a whole nother episode on I think there's a big fear out there for a lot of people of, well, is my Social Security benefit going to last? Because there's all this talk about, Social Security going broke. But I don't think the average consumer, American, however you want to put, understands what that means. And so I think we could have a whole nother
100% agree. Yes.
Because to your point, it is a huge part of most people's retirement. And so kind of that fear of these headlines of Social Security is going broke is, I think, important to cover as well.
Absolutely agree.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate, I know you're in high demand. You have a specialty that most people don't have, and you actually love it.
I do love it.
And can talk about it in a meaningful and concise way. And so I appreciate you giving us here the time at Fiat.
Well, I was really engaged in the tire conversation too, so we could continue talking about that as well. But I will gladly come back and talk about more Social Security stuff with
you. At first, I thought you said the entire conversation, because I'm like, there's no way she said tire.
No, the tire, yeah, the chains on the tires and all that I'll never need here in Georgia. But I look forward to continuing the conversation next time.
Awesome. Thanks again, Heather, for being here with us. As always, I'm your host, Brad Gotto. This is my co-host, Carlson, and we will see all of you next time.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to click the subscribe button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.